here today to talk to you. Before we do that, though, don't forget to join us in our Discord community. Just go to remoteaf.co, click on the community button, join us. Lots of people talking about the same stuff we're going to be talking about today. Also, grab a copy of our white paper, Dynamically Adaptive Organisations. You can find that on our LinkedIn page. And without further ado, that's all that sort of advertising stuff that we necessarily have to do. I'm going to introduce the two wonderful gentlemen I have here. We're going to be talking about how you build an organisation with an agile heart. Craig Brown, Ranganathan, how is it to have you here today?
Glad to have you too. Have you as host, Tony.
I like the way you both looked at each other and said, who's going to talk first?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Tony, it's been ages since the three of us have come together. We were on your YouTube interview program as well, weren't we?
Yeah, that's right. And that's why I was keen to have you back on, because things have moved and changed and shaped. Before we get too far into it, I won't take the supposition everybody knows you and knows where you're from. So let's just take a quick moment, short intro, thing everybody hates doing, but I prefer you to do it. Craig, do you want to tell everybody who you are and where you've come from?
Yeah, cool. I'll give you a recent version. Like Ranganathan and I started a company for almost 5 years ago now called Everest, which is a software development agency. And before that, we worked at a SaaS company called Aconex. And once upon a time, I worked in corporate Australia doing government and projects and IT projects and business improvement projects and stuff like that. But today, me and Ranga are a force to be reckoned with when it comes to good quality, building good products and getting good business outcomes. Force to be reckoned with, Tony.
Brilliant. Ranga, would you like to give your version of that?
My version is almost similar. I come from again a programming kind of developer background for 12 years. Then Craig and I used to work together 5 years. It has been different kinds of roles and responsibilities. And right now, as I said, one common thing that's very common to us is how can we make software engineering a lot better than what it is, and make sure people have amazing culture as they work along with us.
Yeah. So if you get a chance, make sure you go and have a look at the gentleman's website, Everest Engineering. I'll do the plug for you, boys. And that's the organisation we're talking about. Let's just start with talking about how you brought the organisation together with the thought of being an agile organisation. How did that sort of roll about, gentlemen? He's just pointed at you, Ranga.
Yeah. Initially, I think we didn't. It's all the first fundamental mindset, the companies that we dream of, and then the kind of decisions that we make and kind of culture that we want to bring in. So it's not like we start an organization saying that it's going to be an agile organization. It's more of a mindset hey, we started this organization. There's a lot of waves that come and hit you once in a while, very frequently. And sometimes high, sometimes low. Both the times you need to keep on catching the tide. At high times, a lot of times we may not be very, we can go into a careless mode, or we may be very too much pampered. But also on the times when things are not good, it will be very, very much agile and be taking decisions very fast. So what we actually mean by that is how do you make sure the information is distributed very well, and then how fast can we keep the change coming in and adapt to that change? I think that's what we are into. The good thing that happens with any small company is they're by default a bit agile in a way that there are few people taking few amount of decisions, and it makes things move faster. But once the organization grows, I think that's when everything becomes harder. I'll keep referring to a small thing, example a war. Let us take a small set of soldiers who are fighting in a war, and there are two kingdoms, and the goal of the two kingdoms is to protect their king and queen. That's it. Now one kingdom has just 100 soldiers. The other kingdom has say 200 soldiers, or let us take 1,000 soldiers. This, just by being agile and are able to manage the changes and the way they are adapting to those changes, we still can believe that the kingdom with 100 soldiers can overthrow the kingdom with 1,000 soldiers. And that's what exactly happens in business. How do you do that? Is by making sure you have the right decisions coming in. Any change coming in, you're able to move faster and being agile. I'll pass it on to Craig.
Thoughts, Craig?
Yeah, go on. I was just going to say, being able to respond to changing circumstances is, if you started a business, at the end of 2018, like we did, right? And then between then, we've had like all the COVID stuff, right? And then the tech bubble bursting, and then everyone in the world living on the brink of a recession for the last 6 months or 12 months or whatever it's been, right? One thing happens, then another thing happens, then another thing happens. If you don't respond to it, you're dead. So we're definitely living in an age that tests you out. Yeah, I guess large companies have kind of deep pockets, right? So they can kind of survive through financial resilience, but smaller companies just have to perform, right? And I think what that does is gives us an advantage over the long term.
So how do you continue that way? So you're exactly what I talk about as a dynamically adaptive organisation, right? Dynamic meaning there's fast change, there's speed of change needed, and you have to adapt to that change. And that creates that extrinsic pressure from outside the organisation, and creates the internal pressure on you to change and move. And I think we were talking about it off screen. We were talking about you need to embrace the chaos, Craig. So I might lean on you for that, your thoughts on that.
I think if you've ever walked the halls of big, successful tech companies, things that have maybe not existed in the 20th century, but come into existence in this century, right? And now they're making a ton of money, like all the big unicorns and all that sort of stuff, right? Like there's this sentiment that they have their shit together, and that they've got good systems and structures and processes that make things work. But that's not it at all, right? It's absolute chaos inside all of those organizations all the time. It's tied together by a sense of purpose and mission, and it's supported by organizational cultures that value every person's contribution, right? And so, a culture that supports people when they stumble, and a mission that aligns people to where they want to go is the essence of what you need to do to be successful, right? And then when the mission changes because the world has changed, if you don't have all those processes and systems and structures in the way, then you're much more able to respond, right? I think it's interesting to Ranga's point, right? Like that's easy when you're a couple of hundred people, but what if you're 250,000 people? How do you do that? And we've got our examples of that, right? Like the Amazons and the Facebooks, right? And again, you get inside those organizations and you see there's levels of systems and structure and process, but ultimately they embrace chaos, right? They know that that's just how the world has to be. And there's internal competition for resources, and there's people getting in each other's way, and there's politics and all those things that happen when lots of people come together. But the organization lets it happen. And then I think that's the essence of what gives people that resilience and agility at that meta level.
Thoughts, Ranga?
For me, I think one of the core things is let us also think about nations, right? The way nations are at a very, very large scale. And a lot of times when a shock comes in, many nations adopt, there'll be economic crisis and other things, but other nations helping and taking care of things together. But with organizations, there are few aspects. For example, there are investors, there is market, and there are few aspects through which we can't go beyond, and it's beyond our control. So what we can control is how do you actually organize yourself? So first thing is structuring yourself. If you take nations, mostly it's broken down into states, and each state has cities. So it's kind of structure, but you can't apply structure similar structures into an organization. You need to evolve into those structures. What's repeated patterns that you see? What are the things that you want to handle? And what are the strengths that you want to play, repeated play? And then how do you reduce your costs? And when you do that, I think that's when you are being smarter and then trying to reorganize frequently. The hard part is any reorganization always creates some chaos in the short term, but brings more clarity in the long term. So again, aligning people always back into the mission and making sure that a lot of times people, when you go and say when we start scaling, the hard part is how do you align on the actual values and not being transactional, especially also being remote. Most of us go into this transactional mode. Once a change happens, everybody wants, okay, this meeting, why is it there? And a lot of times the meetings are just transactional. They're not to be connected with other people. Hey, I want to, first, most important thing is you need to be connected. You need to have common values, and then you're heading towards common mission. Once you take that, a lot of other things selflessness, egos, and other things will go away, and automatically people go and work towards their mission. So the idea is break down, give them clarity, but also make sure they're connected very closely, but not like just transactionally, and then move ahead. And then that's the only way like we can go ahead. But as company starts becoming larger and larger, this one will become like a really, really hard problem. So you need to make sure like what are the patterns that you're looking at structures, and how you're like realigning yourselves, and also giving like, so what is like, see, there are a lot of studies which say like autonomy is one core value for a lot of people, right? Like, and how do you make sure autonomy is given? Like, so you need to choose what are your values, but once you stick to it, you're like aligning people in those core values together. That comes from recruitment, and after that, like setting up their expectations that these are the core values in which we are operating, and then like aligning them back into the mission, and then structuring yourselves. Once you do that, I think you're going in that direction.
You use that metaphor of nations, and I think that's really interesting, because this is going on a little sidetrack for a minute, but what that made me think of is aid, right? Like if a country gets into trouble, like say Ukraine, for instance, right? Like all these other countries like lean in and try to offer, say, some sort of support, right? And this isn't about the structure thing, but maybe it is in a different way, the ecosystem, right? Like we have these boundaries that we think exist, but then the world, like the war in Ukraine, can change the shape of those boundaries. And so all these other countries like lean in to help someone that's in trouble, just like humans lean in to help humans when they're in trouble. And I'm put in mind of 2020, when we were a pretty young company and we were on this kind of ascent and we were growing, and then all of a sudden, the industry changed, everyone's kind of shutting down work. And we actually had a great response from some of our customers where they went, we'll stick with you if you stick with us. And I was talking to the CTO of one of those companies the other day, and their sentiment towards us was, we really appreciate you guys doing us the favors and sticking by us during that tough time. And there I was thinking they were doing us a favor. And so like there's these experiences where the boundaries of organizations and who pays your payroll and stuff, like at some level they matter, but like actually humans coming together, they create their own network of connections and stuff. And so the one thing is that metaphor around countries and like, what that means for us as organizations. And the other one is like what you were saying, Rango, about like better to let things emerge rather than to plan them too much.
And that's what I see a lot of now, so, and we're not going to get into scaling wars or anything to that, but I see that organizations are trying to structure the daylights out of it, and even structure agile. Like agile by its very nature shouldn't be that complete structure, because it allows you to have that emergent nature, right? So when we hear business agility and we hear scaling and all these types of things, what they're actually doing is trying to put a structure against it. And I think there was an interesting thing we were talking about before is, you've got to meet your customers, haven't you? You've got to meet your customers about where they're at and how they work.
So we're an agency, right? And we're not in the business of telling people how to do their job. But on the other hand, we're pretty experienced at what we do. I was at the Tech Summit conference in Brisbane week before last, and one of the speakers in the morning got up and said the two big bottlenecks to the Australian tech industry are the right level of funding for the scale-up period of a business, right? So startup's fine, and like once you're successful, that's fine too. But the bit in between where you're trying to grow, get international or get global or whatever you're trying to do, there's not enough money around to support that. And so founders are having to go overseas to grow their business the next stage. The other one is like the level of talent and experience in the Australian labour market, right? Like there's just not enough people. Like a number was quoted, I might get this wrong, I think it was 1 in 10,000 people in the tech industry in Australia have experience with that scaling from small to large. And I kind of looked around our organisation in my head, in this mental little exercise, and go, what's our ratio? And it's like, I don't know for sure, but it's like more like 1 in 4, right? And so I go, all right, cool, there's a thing there, right? Like the industry has a problem and we can kind of lean into it and bring some expertise. What I'm kind of rambling on here with is like, it's not about bringing a framework or a process. It's about bringing experience to the table, right? And having walked this path before, so that you can face it with calmness and wisdom and good judgment, versus like having to figure out everything all of a sudden, for the first time, every step of the way, right? And I think like you didn't want to get into the scaling wars, but like I'm kind of empathetic to the people that like go, all right, cool, like here's a 5-step process or whatever, because it reduces complexity for people and it reduces the cognitive load of dealing with the problems that they're facing. But on the other hand, like I feel like they're training wheels, right? And you got to grow through it into like a more adult version of your organization.
Yeah. Well, as I said to you, I don't have a problem with the premise of what I have a promise is when the premise takes over, you've got to be following dot point 1, dot point 2, and dot point 3. And if you're not doing that, then you're not doing it right, regardless of whether you're getting the outcomes right. And we see that happening.
Yeah. Those frameworks and processes should be a platform for launching from, not a destination, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. Got a question there for you, Craig. I'll just throw it up on screen. It'd be interesting for you to answer that one from Edwina.
How do you balance that ability to pivot agile enablers with, say, government organization who needs certainty up front? I think different organizations have different needs, right? Like if you're a startup, you don't know what's going on in the future. You don't know whether people really want your product. You don't know whether there's an addressable market. You don't know whether you're going to have money next year. And so you need to sense and respond at a much frequent rate. And even if you're a large organization, like a bank or a phone company or something like that, like you've got environmental challenges that are coming at you all the time. So in banking, the Australian industry has been pretty regulated for a long time, but gradually those regulations are reducing and there's more threat from like overseas competitors. In telco, basically Telstra and Optus kind of own the market, right? And they can't grow their business anymore. And there's this imperative to continue to grow. How do they do that, right? So they've got to find new markets, right? So they have to sense and respond their way into the future. I think government at an execution level should be sensing and responding, but the systems in place put some restrictions in the way, right? Like, because you've got this adversarial parliamentary situation, and if anyone makes a mistake in the execution, it's going to get to Parliament and it can jeopardize government's sustainability, right? And so we've got a structural problem in that, and I don't think you can solve it like if you're on an IT project. I think you have to kind of work with it. So instead, you go within the framework of what we've got. What's our sense and respond needs, right? So, it's around user experience or quality of delivery or reduce waste. It's not about, is the policy that was decided by a bunch of politicians real or not? Like, you're committed to that, you don't have a choice. But what you can do is how do we execute on this and how do we do it efficiently? So I think it's just pick the threshold and that you're going to operate to.
Yeah.
But the principles all still work at the context that you choose.
I find horizon planning works with those kind of organisations as well. And when because I do quite some work with governments, and they'll want a steadfast 5-year plan, but we all know government's going to change before the 5-year plan comes in anyway. So what are the horizons of what you can achieve, and that clicks in with what you're saying, Craig, about that execution of.
What kind of time zones, like time horizons, do you think are useful for government?
My experience is if you're talking any more than 18 months, you're sort of falling out of that phrase, because governments tend to be in caretaker mode. They get to that. There's a small sweet spot where they can deliver, and they're in caretaker mode while they're waiting to see what the next government's coming in, and then they're in caretaker mode while they're waiting where the next new government's coming in, and there's a bit of flux. So for me, that's
okay. So that might be that Horizon 3 level, right? Like, what's the Horizon 2 and Horizon 1 for you?
Yeah, so the Horizon 1 for me usually is the first 12 months, because that's when they're really going to hit the road, and usually that's when if government's changed, you're hitting that funding, and that falls into that sense and respond piece with you that you're talking about, Craig. You've got to sense and respond to that environment, right? If it's a particular government area that's got a really hard topic, like let's say housing at the moment, doesn't matter where you go in the country, housing is a big one, then that's going to probably be a smaller horizon, because the pressure will be on it. You would look at a smaller horizon of what can we get done in that period of time, and how do we sense and respond, and what are the executions that we can put in place that are going to get you the capital.
Yeah. Rango,
I just want to add something small. I'll add a small bit to it, but what I personally feel is again, government as such, when we say government, we just think it's very big, but it's a set of people, and there's a lot of rules and a few systems and processes in place. In these things, I think the hard part is we can't touch the rules, because rules are very hard to bend or break there, and they're surrounded by a lot of other stuff. But what we can do is there are people, and when you actually want to do a change, there are always when you take people are always on towards and against it. You'd always look at people who are towards it, who really wants that change to happen, and they're their own personal benefits, or they want for the common good, they want to get it done. So find those people who are supporting it, And for all others, how can you influence it and then like bring that change? I think it's more about again working with people and then trying to influence and bringing that change, and then trying to communicate that back to the broader organization. But still, like compared to a private organization, startup, I think it's still like complicated with governments because of a lot of, like as Craig said, it will have like implications in the parliaments and other things. But still, you even in the parliament, it's all like a lot of people. So who are the people who really want the change? How good are they at communicating the change in a way that we are able to experiment it or like make it better? And then how do you bring in that influence in that support and then get that support towards you? I think that's more important.
Yeah. I'm gonna turn us back inside. So I think that was great insight from both you gentlemen, because you're interacting with these organisations.
Before Tony, you take us down a different track, I want to ask a question to Ranga. Like Tony talked about, like 18 months, and then a year is the kind of the windows for Horizon 1, 2, 3. Where does your instinct tell you it should sit for us?
For Everest, are you saying?
Yeah, so for Horizon 1, 2, and 3 into the future.
Hey, you should be the interviewer, mate. Sorry.
Wait your turn, Tony. It's all right.
I think I always think my shortest one is like maybe like a few months, like 3 to 4 months kind of thing, and the long one is like this year, because like I think if you don't keep the month short, we can't go too short in a way that like we keep changing everything very frequently, but we can do a change that need to like allow it to like just like expand, settle down. Like the laws of thermodynamics, you need to like allow it to settle down. You can't keep on stirring it continuously. Allow it to settle down, stir again, allow it to settle down, and mix different things. So for me, that is the 3 months thing based on our organization size. Then like then larger one will be like 1 year, and always have like a very long vision of like, when I say long vision, is not more than 5 years for me right now, because the way things are and the way the world is. So always like 5 years is a long horizon for me, and then like keep on changing that 5 year plan like in like 1 year or something.
Yeah, cool. Right. My wait, Tony, wait your turn. My 3 points, I think, are about 6 weeks, 6 months, and then about 2 years.
It's interesting you said the 6 weeks, because what I said I was going to turn it a little bit was it was actually talking about the planning, and so I'll turn it inwards to you, but it certainly plays out to the question that was asked, because what I've seen, and I've formed an opinion over a period of time, so I'm going to throw it to you gentlemen as well, is that we've seen this through scaling and through this whole thing about quarterly planning. Right now, when I was first taught Agile, we didn't do that kind of quarterly big planning, because those big cycles are plugged in your annual, etc. What we looked at was they called it short-wave planning back then, but that's been adulterated into terrible things. But I just call it short cycle planning, and what I look at is if you've got this VUCA coming at you, you've got this intrinsic changes coming at you, and you've got to react to it. If you're putting a quarterly plan in place, by the time you put that plan in place, everything's changed around it anyway. And in most organisations I'm walking into, the plan's changed and they're not delivering what they said they were going to deliver in the first place. So why bother doing that, except that if somebody wants certainty? So why not look at a shorter cycle planning? And what I usually look at is around a 6-week planning. So my interesting thought to you is how do you look at that?
So for me, I think personally, like when you said like short term, right? Like when Craig said 6 weeks, I think for me short term is always about like putting in hypothesis, experimenting it, and then making sure you're going to the larger like second horizon, just like in the reason is like always like we try to like we can't experiment forever, right? Like we need to put a hypothesis, make sure that change is happening. Hey, the market changed for this, and everybody has an opinion. So we need to come back and say like these are the common opinions, repeated patterns. Let us focus on this. The hard problem, like if you see in the beginning, Craig said, you always need to value experience. And experience, I think, brings good things 20% of time, but also 20% of time, they can't be confident, right? Like they know that this thing happened, but these are like, you need to wait, this thing will happen. But the 20% is where like you need to experiment, but take the experience along, and then like value the experience a lot, but put that experiments in place, define your hypothesis and see like what happens, and then be patient on the short horizon. The long one, then you're like actually heading towards the longer path.
Yeah. I by the way, 6 weeks and quarters both have a relationship to each other for me, because like you can't get anything done in a week, because like Ranga says, you got to kind of wait and see through to what's the impact you made. It's not just did you do a thing, it's like did you achieve a goal, right? But also half the things you're going to do are going to not work. So like on average, right, in 3 months, you've got something that worked, right? And one of them didn't, and one of them did.
Yeah. So, and for me, that's that adaptive piece that we were talking about as we were coming into this session. Is if you're going to be able to dynamically adapt to it, you do have to have that planning that allows you to adapt. But I'm gonna get off that subject and move to the right a little bit for you, Jonathan, because we are talking about how you build an organisation that's still at heart agile, which allows you to have that dynamic adaptability. And one of those things is leadership. So now I get to turn the spotlight on you too, right? How do you change the frame of leadership if you're going to change the things that we just talked about? How do you become adaptive leaders? Because the way you were leading it yesterday might not be the way you need to lead it tomorrow based on the change. So I'm really interested in hearing how that's played out in your world and the things that you see. I saw Ranga leaning to the screen, so I'll flip to you first because you obviously had an opinion on it.
I can do it. I didn't lean it for that. Like I was just leaning. Yeah. So I think that's a very, very interesting point and question, Tony. Like, because every time I think a lot of people think like leadership is a constant style or constant change. Actually, if you take a 5 years younger version of me, I think I would be a lot more different person when thrown a problem or like thrown up at different aspects. I think experience is something that keeps on adding and then changes you as a leader, and then that's very important. And you need to keep on acknowledging the errors and then keep on like realigning ourselves, so we learn. One of the things again I recently, or like I have always a challenge is like how much ever I know other cultures, there are like quite some basic cultural instincts that come inside you, and then that defines your style. The first thing is be very explicit about your style when you're like working across different cultures, because if you don't have like your way of working, I think a lot of people would come with an expectation that this is the ideal leader for me, but this ideal leader is built from all the things that I see from my culture. I'll take a simple example. Let us take positional authority, right? Like, or something like that, or power dynamics. Like, so let us take power distance at the big value thing. If you take simple thing like power distance in India, like generally people accept power distance. So there is like a lot of acceptance there. The reason being, first thing, it's a collective thing. So that's the other dynamic there. Uh, so people being individualistic versus collective, it's collective, and then it's like very power driven. What I mean by that is when you're young, if you have like grandparents, you need to respect your grandparents a lot more than your parents. So the age of respect is very, very important in this culture, which means so they touch the feet of the grandparents frequently on different occasions. So it's that level. Like, so there is a set of systems defined in a way that a older person comes in, or when I meant elder person by age comes in, they're respected more than like another experienced person in the field. So people generally have an acceptance to like the way of like doing things. For example, when an elderly person comes and sits, other people stand. So there are like basic things that come in. And when I see those things, they are culturally built in like at some level, like inside you, like, and then suddenly you're working with global teams. You need to like balance that. Like, but the expectation there is a lot more different. People want to be individualistic. They don't want to be told like what they want to do, right? But how do you balance it? First thing is you can't go and say like your style is the only way that you're working, right? You need to tell like, hey, this is the style I'm coming in, educate them, and also like try to align them first, always like with the different cultures. And second thing is always try to delegate things that you're not strong at. For example, like when I have to take decisions on Australia and cultural aspects of things, I would not take a decision directly. I would first consult or like delegate mostly. Like, so I'll go through like Craig or like there are other leaders who are like very respectable, and I value their opinion. So go through them. So there are things like that where I keep on changing and then like try to align that based on like over time. But that's my approach right now. But I will not tell like I have like a core set of values that will not change over time. Values like will not change, but my style definitely changes. But it's more on adapting the style and then like requirement.
Yeah.
We'll pass it on to Craig.
I like that. I like that adapters of his style that brings with me. Craig, thoughts? There's a few questions. We'll get to those, but Craig, your thoughts?
Yeah. Two things. Like adaptive leadership styles, like you need to turn up to face the situation, right? And the situation changes, so you need to be able to be adaptive, right? we're an agency and we work with different customers, different clients, different organizations, and they've all got their own circumstance. So I think we need another level of adaptability because we've got our own internal stuff we need to deal with, but then we're standing shoulder to shoulder with their customers, looking at their problems, and we've got to fit into that paradigm as well. That's just not me and Ranga, that's everyone in our company. And if you don't flex into the shared context, you're going to be an outlier and you're not going to be in the way, you're going to be creating friction. The other thing though is people need consistency, right? And I tend to adopt a persona when I take a job, and apparently my current persona is grumpy old bastard.
I don't know if that's actually a persona that is made up.
Yeah, right.
Exactly
right. But there's a consistency to it, which at least means people can kind of know that, like, I might get cranky, but like there's no kind of follow through on it. It's just like in the moment, right? And so, I think when you're in a leadership role, like consistency in how you act is really important at the same time as adaptability. It's one of those two opposing things, both true at the same time situations, right? So, you need to draw on different skills and techniques to face the problem that you're looking at. But as a human, you need to be reliable for the people that are relying on you.
It's a balance, isn't it? And I see these different leadership mechanisms, and I'll get to these couple of questions, but I see these leadership mechanisms out there. I call them mechanisms, whatever you want to call them, and not that I have any problem with them, but I've heard the one that really always grates on me is and I know I'm going to cause the agile heretics to come after me, but servant leadership, right? Look up the word servant. Most leaders are not servants, right? And if they're not at the beck and call because they are leaders and they need to lead. So it's thinking about how you actually lead the organisation as you're talking about it. That's Tony's thought. There's a question for you though. I'm not sure if it'll all come up on screen because sometimes when they get a bit big, we can't see them.
Yeah. Wish that. Do you want to go?
I'm just reading it. So the question is.
I'll go. I've read it. So I'll tell you what I reckon. Change is intimidating and cause tiredness. How do you leverage change? Well, I've got two views on it, right? And they're complementary. One is change is a constant. You just got to all buy into that, right? And I think what you can do organizationally is create a change fitness by doing it well, right? If in comes McKinsey and they change everything on you, and then like 3 years later, in comes Bain and they change everything on you. It's like you're being slapped around and you have no sense of agency in that process, right? And so you're not going to develop fitness, you're going to develop resentment, right? But if you as an organization can come together and recognize problems together and go, cool, we're all on the same page about what the problem is, and then all the voices contribute into, still you might not delegate the decision making to a small bunch of people, but like all the voices are listened to on the change journey, you feel much more in control of it. And then the flip side back is like the people that are driving the change, whether they're senior managers or consultants or whatever they are, right? Like tell the story, right? Like, and share the wins, right? Like, there's years ago I worked with this lady who was very good at communications, and like I was trying to get some messaging out, and she said, let me fix it for you. And in 30 seconds she looked at my email and rewrote it and said it, and it became a pattern that I started leveraging, right? Which is like, you said this was a problem, we did this, now that's not a problem anymore, right? And if you can do that when you're driving change, right, if you can connect the acts and the outcomes that you've deployed to problems that people wanted fixed, then everyone can kind of accept the change and get excited about it, right? But if you just go, this is what we're doing now, get on board or get out, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Ranga, your thoughts on it? Now you've had a chance to read it.
Yeah, sure. So change, I think, it's again linked with the tiredness of the employees. I think when we put a change, the size of the change and the frequency of the change is what we also need to observe. Like anytime when somebody wants to change something, like to say there is a problem coming in, 10 people have 10 different ideas and they all want to implement a change. If you're like too much, again, it depends on the structure, but if the decision is just one person's, then like what Craig said will come out, right? Like one person decision, nobody else is included and just get pushed through. It's very hard. Like it of course creates tiredness. The second one is like also the frequency of so then like we'll follow like what the same thing, right? What Craig said, keep them inclusive, but like try to come up with a common structure and then solve it together. And then like then I think people will feel like a lot more better. The other one is like frequency of change. A lot of times we I and Craig keep on discussing, saying that already this big change has happened. Let us not bring in too many changes right now. Like let us push this. Is it high priority? No, right? Then slow it down. Like we can't keep on communicating too many changes to people because it confuses people. So it's something like this, right? Like you're all going into like you all want to head like this. You change your direction, change your direction, change your direction. People get tired. What you can do is like, hey, we are going like this. You can take a simple change, but like you can take some time to like change other direction, even if it is like very like unless it's important or urgent, you should give it some time to absorb and then like so there are people, right? You can't keep on changing frequently. So that's my view.
At a philosophical level or a principle-based level, I disagree with what you just said. At a practical level, the scale of the decisions that we make in our organization are pretty small, right? And why I think I kind of at a principle level disagree is because I don't think you want to slow down the changes because they're big. I think you want to decompose the changes into a lot of small ones, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
So like Ranganathan and I talked, like we changed a bunch of like regular meetings that people have, and we like basically knocked out 4 meetings and replaced them with one, right? And that affects like 15 people or something, right? And then it gives them all more time, right? And I was arguing yesterday about like, maybe we can kind of break this into a smaller change, right? Like, get rid of the 4 first and then do the 1, or like, right? We didn't get into the details of it because at the end of the day, it's just like argue a bit, but we've got 10 minutes and then we'll make a decision and go, right? But at a bigger organizational level, the great question to ask is, what's the smallest thing that we can do today, right? And instead of having organizational restructures across the whole organization every 3 years, if we just have constant change all the time, every month or every quarter, a new small change is made, it just becomes, like I was saying, like there's a change fitness, right? It just becomes how things are and you just become adaptable.
Yeah.
Right? Now, there are people in the workforce in the world, right? And they kind of range from like, I love change, it stimulates me and gets me excited, to I hate change, I've got enough stress in my life and I don't need more, right? So there's a tolerance that everyone has, and you've got to understand the people in your organization and what their tolerance is as well. So there's no universal one way. It's like, who is your team? What is your culture today? What's your fitness? And what's your tolerance?
All right, gentlemen, I'm going to just throw a question up here as well that goes to what we were just talking about. So does Agile matter to leaders you work with? A diverse set of conflict and frameworks doesn't seem like a good tool for navigating things like budget or compliance.
Let's go to Craig again.
I think people try to shove too much into the Agile box, right? Like I think, what's agility? It's the ability to respond, to sense and respond, to inspect and adapt, the ability to make decisions and shift your intent frequently. And so I think that mainly goes to decision-making capability. And in software, of course, it goes to software code quality, so that you can kind of build new features or change the product direction without like having to re-platform everything every 2 years, right? And so there's the agile software development, and that's about like code practices and code quality and architecture and stuff like that. And then there's the business agility, and that's about like how you make decisions, right, and how information flows through an organization. But it's just that, right? Like, what's the right product strategy? That's product management. What's the business strategy? That's business strategy, et cetera, right? So that's what I reckon.
Thoughts, Ranga?
Yeah, the second part of it, like where there is like a diverse set of conflicting frameworks, that's also like really, so we say it's agile, but we also like introduce a lot of frameworks saying that it's a fixed way of doing things. So the reason it is there is like for predictability, like, so like how do you predict and then like convince people to do repeated set of things? But what, again, coming back to the core essentials of like, I think bigger organizations will face it harder because like if you don't bring in a framework or like set a defined set of processes and other things in place, it becomes for like as the number of people increase, it becomes hard for us to communicate the changes and being very agile. So the adaptability of like, you need to fix on like some frameworks, you can like redesign it to adapt to your organization. But it's always conflicting, as in the statement, it's of course always conflicting because like very hard to get like 100 people to follow the same framework because different people have different ways of doing things, and we need to respect that. So you have to live with it. But if you're like smaller organization, you can just have like you can be a little bit more agile even with the frameworks and things that you do.
So let me ask you a question off the back of that, because agility by its very rote, when you bring that to an organization, disseminates control. Right.
Yep.
So for leaders, that makes it very interesting, because if control is disseminated, then the only other lever to pull is command. If you so fall into that, how do you stop yourselves from falling into that command piece, guys? How do you make sure that you continue to disseminate that control, not take it?
I think that's a framing problem, right? Like I think a leader's job has a degree of command in it, right? Which is like mission and purpose, right? Like, this is what we're there to do, right? And this is the constraints that we live in. And so there's some guardrails that you have to kind of lay down and say, like, don't break the law and like work within these constraints. And that's a command, right? Like, they're the rules of the game. And the other one is, here's what we're here to do, right? And here's what success looks like, and here's what failure looks like. Again, that's a command. That's the direction we're going, right? Don't be an asshole about it, right? Respect the people, like listen to people and take on feedback and all that sort of stuff. But I would imagine, like in a modern organization, some leader in an organization doesn't just make unilateral decisions without consulting with people, right? They've got experts that like feed into the decision making process. So I think command is not a problem, right? Like doing it well is the trick.
Right.
And then the other side is like there are some controls, right? And I think that people focus too much on process and rules. What we should do is start reframing things as constraints, right? What are the things that we can't do? And then they should be stripped back to the bare minimum, right? Like, there's certain demographics that we won't address. There's, certain industries we won't work in. There's laws that we won't break, right? But otherwise, have at it.
Ranga,
For me, like control, I think is a fantastic tool in only one scenario, which is like when there is chaos. Like when there's chaos, like if you just take military, for example, they always have control, very strong control, because they're working in chaos. And that chaos, like if you don't have control, you don't like know like what to make a sedation. So somebody needs to take a call and then keep pushing things. So when you want that's why we say like keep the situation under control. So what's the situation? But you can't use it always. Like you need to, again, like you have a plan, you have an outcome to be delivered, but there are like different styles in which like you can delegate it and then like allow them to like have their own style to like deliver the outcome. But there is like few things like planning and outcome which you can take people together, but you can't like you need to have like some kind of control. Like without control, it's actually a very like as I said, like the way it is used, it can be seen as a good tool, or it can be like seen as like when it becomes too much authoritative.
It brings order, right? It brings order, right? If you don't have any controls, you'll spin into chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah, but not to an extent that like you're not like allowing people to do their jobs. You're telling them. So that's why it's like you can do that only during chaos. Like, but apart from that, you should allow them.
And I guess there's a thing there too, where you kind of got the front line where the work is being done, right? And you should let the people at the front line make decisions about how that work is done, right? And like think of a product team, right? You got software developers, and they've got like tools that are given to them by architects that are never going to meet them face to face and stuff like that. Like you should shed as many of those rules as you can afford to, but there's also some rules that have to be in place, right? Like there's software licenses, you don't want to be paying, tens of millions of dollars if you don't need to, right? So, pay attention to the trade-offs, but the further you get away from the front line, like the constraints, right, do become more and more important, right? Like what's our mission? Is it everything or is it that thing? Yeah.
Gentlemen, we're nearly at the end of our time. So I have one question I wanted to dive into because, and thanking you for letting me take you through the gamut. But the one that I want to really hear about here, and it's close to my heart, is I talk about you have to have deliberately developmental cultures. The Keegan kind of thought, and with the pressures of downturn and the pressures of the things that are striking organisations, what I see is the first thing they do is start to take away those budgets of imbuing and developing their people to hold on to the tightness of the organisation. Is that the right way to go? How do you see that? What's your thoughts on that?
I think I have like one point there. Like for me, like most important thing like during this period is like stability that we can give, and that stability can come at the cost of like say again an informed decision, right? Hey, if you need to take this set of tools which are like for example, like these are like the video conferencing tools. Do we need it right now, or can we adjust with other tools which are like free, right? Like, and that like a minimal like a summation of multiple costs like that would mean like 5 jobs for like another 1 year, like stability in jobs. Then be very open about it and transparent about it and say like, do you want to do this, or do you want to cut those jobs and like take up those tools, right? But not there are a lot of like free and like peer-to-peer learning and other things that we can do and leverage it. And those are the things that we need to leverage and take calls. Like, as I said, like we shouldn't compromise on the values as such, like deliberately learning or like a lot of other benefits that we have. There's knowledge everywhere. Like, so how do you like fine tune it and restructure yourself to help them as a value are not coming down, but as a thing that you want to give us a stability. Like, for example, Are we giving you growth or are we giving you stability, right? Like right now in the market, stability is more important. So we try to give stability, but at the cost of what, right? And how we are doing it. So being very open.
Brilliant. Craig, you get the last word, which is always the way.
All right. Well, I like Ranga's talked about like our approach at Everest, right? Try to build stability for people as the first principle, right? Like we'll trade off a lot of stuff before we'll like take stability away from people. The other thing is at a more industry level, like, you know, you and the agile coaching industry that you're a part of, Tony, look at that smile on his face. Like product managers and designers and mid-tier managers and agile coaches in this last 12 months, a ton of them have lost their job, right? A ton haven't. And I think collectively, I think the agile coaching industry has kind of made the mistake of not caring about value and just trust me, it'll be good. And instead there needs to be a more commercial orientation to the value proposition of the, you know, the coaching role, right? And I have never had a coaching role specifically, but I've had middle level management jobs, and I've always had a definitive measure. It's not the only thing I bring to the table, but some hard measure of my contribution to the organization that I've been able to show, right? That's got some equivalent of dollar value to it, right? Could be risk, could be dollars, could be a bunch of things, but like the agile coaching industry basically has ignored that. And I've sat in meetings and workshops and conference talks where people have talked about it, and there's methods and tools and stuff, but the industry's just never done it, right? And I guess part of the reason for that is because the demand for those people was so big over the last 10 years. People just turned up, they did their CSM certificate and off they went. They had a good career and a good salary and all that sort of stuff. And then all of a sudden the market changes and you're fucked, right? So I think even, you know, like I was talking to somebody else today who described their business as we've always run like we're in a recession. And so now that we're in one, these times were made for us, right? And they're thriving. And so I think, you know, you don't have to be as brutal as that, but like, you know, respect that like the gravy train you're on isn't going to last forever. Yeah.
I can hear Bob Galen out there right now going, yes, because I had him on here a couple of weeks ago. And that's why I was smiling, because I knew where you were going. And I could completely agree with you. You know, the value, it's that value add. And agile coaches haven't had to represent their agile value, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think they're very good at it. And necessarily, I think they need to be.
Yeah. I think in the 10 years ahead of us, right, like that'll correct, right? Like, and the same is true for product managers and others, right? Like no one's challenging the value of project managers and business analysts today, right? They're still needed. And everyone just goes, yeah, of course we need a BA. Yeah, of course we need a project manager, right? Yeah. The overall demand for them has gone down, but the case for that role being in existence is very established, right? So, yeah, you know, and I just think the project manager and the designer and the agile coach roles or industries will do that for themselves in the next few years as a response to 2023.
Gentlemen, we're at the end of our time. It's been a pleasure having you on. Thank you for talking to us today. And I hope everybody's got a window into some thoughts around how things are happening. One thing for everybody is how can they touch base with you and Everest Engineering if something you've said's piqued their interest today?
They can connect with us on LinkedIn, but we also have like hi@everest.engineering, so they can write to us.
Brilliant. Yeah. So we'll put that in the show notes so they can find you. Gentlemen, again, thank you for being on and talking remote today.
See you down the track, Tony. We'll do it again, right?
Yeah, we will indeed. Too many unleft things to talk about.
Exactly. I got to interview you next time.